وخاتم رسله وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on Maraqi al-Falah, Sharh Nur al-Idah, we have reached praying the fard and the wajib on a mode of transportation. So we looked at the nawafil and then praying the nafil prayers on a mode of transportation, such as, in the old days, whether it be a donkey or a camel, or akin to that would be a car or a bus in our times, or a train or the like. And so there's a logical order here between the chapters and their interrelated issues. But the nafil can be permitted on an animal, right? Outside city limits, right? But the fard, it's a bit different. Because the fard, because of its shiddat al-ta'keed, because of how more strongly it is emphasized, its rulings are more tight. That's clearly understood from, and the biggest consideration is that there are arkan that are qabila lis-suqut. What are the arkan qabila lis-suqut? That's what we call the rukn. Yeah. And the different arkan fall in different ways. Like if you think of a complete state, like you have the rows of a full prayer, right? And there's things that are easily shed, and there's things that are contingently shed, right? But technically all of it could be shed in different circumstances. So he tells us, rahimahullah ta'ala, فصل في صلاة الفرض والواجب على الدابة, praying the fard and the wajib on a mount, literally on an animal. والمحمل. What's a mahmil? What's a mahmil? Or a carriage. Right? A carriage, that would be that which is mounted on an animal. It could also be behind an animal, like if you have a like a horse and cart kind of thing. So he says, لا يصح على الدابة صلاة الفرائض. Right? You can say لا يصح, or you can say لا تصح. Right? But it's a mu'annath majazi. It's a metaphorical feminine, so there's more leeway in that. You have يصح or تصح? Yeah. Right? But that's why, right? لا يصح على الدابة is not valid on an animal, likewise in a car or a bus or a train. Now a train is a little different. Let's keep trains to the side. We'll look at that in a second, right? Certainly a car or a bus, it would not be valid to perform the fard nor the wajib. ولا الواجبات كالوتر والمنذور والعيدين ولا قضاء ما شرع فيه نفلا فأفسده, nor making up what one started of the nafil and then corrupted it. Why? Because this becomes contingently wajib. Contingently wajib. ولا صلاة الجنازة, nor the funeral prayer, because it's fard kifaya. ولا سجدة, nor a prostration. Now you'll notice in your journey of talab al-ilm that mutun, the shuruh when it comes to the mutun, are of two types. Some commentaries keep the i'rab of the matan as it is, and the commentary works around the expression of the matan to preserve the i'rabic structure of the matan as is, and builds the commentary on top of that. Others don't. And here Imam Ash-Shumbulali doesn't, right? Because if you read the matan on its own, وَلَا سَجْدَةٌ, right? تُلِيَتْ آيَاتُهَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ, nor a prostration, meaning any prostration whose verses were recited on the ground, right? But he said, وَلَا سَجْدَةٌ وَلَا سَجْدَةُ تِلَاوَةٍ, right? Because that's the sajda that counts. Because the other sujood, because you say وَلَا سَجْدَةٌ, there could be a critique here in terms of legal precision. Now, the legal mind, you need to sharpen it, but you can't abuse it, right? The metaphor it's used is like the water. It's like if you have knives. If you're cooking, you need to keep your knives sharp. But you need to know when you need to sharpen your knife. Because, yeah, you have a watermelon. Would it be cut with the medium sharp knife? Yeah. So there's no need to sharpen the whole time, because it's tiring. Similarly, the precision, because the critique that lends itself here, we say, وَلَا سَجْدَةٌ, nor any prostration. What are other prostrations? Sajda to shukr. Or you can make sajda for tawbah, etc. You can make sajda as a qurbatan lillahi ta'ala, not specifically recommended, but you can. But none of those have any Quran recitation in them. Right? In sajda to shukr, can you recite Quran? Because the prostration of thanks or other prostrations are, what would be the ruling of reciting Quran in the prostration? No, a prostration. Makruh tahriman. Because reciting Quran in prostration is prohibited, whether in the prayer or out of the prayer. So that's why there'd be the matan, the expression would be criticized there for potentially. So he just adjusted it. وَلَا سَجْدَةٌ. If you said وَلَا سَجْدَةُ, if you say nor the prostration, the al could be referential, meaning of recitation. So it's good to notice these things, but don't give people a hard time, because language is also based on fair understanding with the ulama. And this sharp understanding is important because in al-Falah, al-Talaq, and things that have real relevance, contracts, these have major implications. Right? So that's why we're saying, notice these things. But وَلَا سَجْدَةُ تِلَاوَةٍ, nor in a prostration of recital. قَدْ تُلِيَتْ آيَاتُهَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ, whose verses were recited on the ground. Right? Because if you recited it while riding, you could prostrate on that, with head movements, etc. Right? He says, إِلَّا لِضَرُورَةٍ, right? Except out of necessity. And here ضرورة is a للحاجة الشديدة المعتبرة, right? Because ضرورة has an usuli usage, preservation of life and limb. Sometimes the ulama use ضرورة as synonymous with حاجة. Sometimes it's used for al-hajatu shadida, right? Or you can say al-darura, if you want to sort of couch it, you can say the darura is a haja mu'tabara, a recognized need. And that's sort of like a legal couching. Why? In some situations, what is a recognized need? Adna al-haja. Any basic recognized need. But here, what kind of need would allow you not to stand, not to face the qibla? That which is sufficient to drop the qiyam. That which is sufficient to drop facing the qibla, etc. Right? Illa li darura. So it's al-haja, but it doesn't have to be at the level of so it's al-haja al-mu'tabara, right? But it has to be strong. Right? نص عليها في الفرض بقوله سبحانه وتعالى فإن خفتم فرجالا أو ركبانا. And if you fear, right? If you fear, then رجالا, walking or riding. And رجالا has a range of interpretations. I will keep that. You can look at it. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 239. Now, Tahtawi mentions, right? Now the nafil is, they say, naflu mabniun ala tawassu'. The nafil is based on expansiveness, right? So the nafil, even without need, if you're outside city limits, can you pray the nafil in your car, for example? Yeah. Do you have to face the qibla in the beginning? No. Etc. Now, if there's necessity, so like you're caught in a snowstorm, right? And you went out because you're still half asleep, so you decided to go in your pajamas to buy milk. And then a snowstorm started. Now, if you're able to hear, they say مجاز لضرورة يقدر بقدرها. What is established due to necessity is limited to the necessity. So where is the harm if you're stuck in a snowstorm of praying on the ground? Is the inability to pray standing, correct? Would that absolve you then from facing the qibla? No. Right, so if you're stuck in a snowstorm, like you got to the convenience store, and now you're like, I'm in a shalwar kameez and slippers. Right, so after some self-rebuke, you realize, okay, and oh my goodness, it's Fajr time. Fajr is going to go out. Are you excused from praying outside in your pajamas during a snowstorm? In your slippers? Yeah. But can you still face the qibla? If you can, you must. Right? You must. And if you can stop the car, or likewise the animal, you must. Right? Because the asl in the prayer is ittihadul makan, to be in one place where possible. So that's why Tahtawi's footnote, that's the context of it, right? قال في الخلاصة, and you can read it from the khulasa. Right? But if you're not able to face the qibla, right? So you went to the grocery store and you forgot to pay your bill, and the uncle there, who already doesn't like you, decide to chase after you with his rifle. So you're driving away, trying to save your life from your upset uncle. So you could pray the fard while driving, because you're running away from uncle who's trying to shoot you if you gets too close. Right? If it's sufficient fear of life, you could miss the prayer in that situation, right? So anyways, that's the issue. That's where the fard in necessity, seated, is different from the nafil outside city limits. Right? And just conceptually you could diagram that. But this is permitted without need. This requires strong need. He gives us examples. He says, وَالْوَاجِبْ مُلْحَقٌ بِهِ. And the wajib is the same. The witr, for example. كَخَوْفِ لِصٍّ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ أَوْ دَابَّتِهِ. Such as fear from a thief regarding oneself or one's animal. Which kind of khawf? Khawf mu'tabar, recognized fear. Okay. Let's say at 11 p.m. Certainly here. Forget, yeah, anywhere. Like people say, oh, it's dangerous. Now, one is sufficient dangerous. What? You know, the shahadat al-hal goes against you. Right? Sometimes you have to be practical. People say, can I pray in my car at night? So, okay, where do you park? In the parking lot? Like many women ask this question. Right? Now, we're not making judgments. Should they be out of that? Forget all of that. But auntie says, can I pray in my car? Because I fear for myself at Maghrib time. Okay, where did you stop? I went to buy pan. What else are you doing? So you can go from your car to buy pan, and then you can go to the supermarket, and you can walk safely from the parking lot. If you can be standing outside, you could be praying outside. Right? So this is not such a, that's not a reasonable fear. Simple thing to do, to go to a crowded place and pray there, slightly away from where the crowd is gathered, because it's much safer than to pray in an isolated place, right? Because in most places where there is law and order, no one's going to lynch you in a public place. Generally. If you're in an exceptional situation, ask the ulama there. Right? The assumption is that people live in places that are safe, or reasonably safe, because otherwise they wouldn't be living there. The fact that you left home means it's probably safe to be outside. In the general case. Right? Or look around. And people say, well, in Pakistan can you do it? Okay, so you can go to eat kebab outside and it's safe. But you can't pray 2 rak'ahs because it's not safe? How does that make any sense? So this is yukhalifuhu shahadatu zahir, right? It's opposed by the witness of the apparent. يعني أو دابته أو ثيابه, or fearing for one's clothing that it'll get muddy or dirty, right? ولم تقف له رفقته, or if one's companions won't stop for one. That happens on family trips, for example. They refuse to get off, but there one would be obligated to request it. Right? 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 وَخَوْفِ سَبُعٍ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ وَدَابَّتِهِ, or fear, again, credible fear of a wild animal against oneself or one's animals. Fear of a dog would not be an excuse, especially in a city. Because the basis of a dog in a city is that it's tame. When's the last time you heard about a dog harming someone in a city? If you see a dog walking in the city, like in the GTA, is there a credible threat to your life or well-being? No, that's not a credible fear. Now, al-khawf al-tab'i, just you're afraid of dogs. Now, unless it's a phobia or something, it's not credible. Just close your eyes. ووجود مطر وطين في المكان يغيب فيه الوجه أو يلطخه, or there's enough rain or mud in the place you're going to pray such that your face would disappear in the mud, right? Or would make you muddy. ويتلف ما يبسط عليه, or something that you put on the mud would be ruined. Okay? And the caution is that a certain amount of hardship is reasonable. أما مجرد النداوة فلا يبيح ذلك. As for there just being some moisture or some wetness without it dirtying dirtying you, or more scrupulously, such as your face would disappear in it, or it would ruin your clothing, then that's not an excuse. Broadly, there are three. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that are said about this, right? That because of that, how much wetness is needed to be able to pray at home or to be able to pray sitting down. Some texts would indicate, because it says إذا ابتلت النعال, and what is na'al? What's na'al? أعوذ بالله من الشيطان. It's better to say I don't know. Ni'al is sandals. Na'al is al-aradi as-sulba. It's when hard ground becomes wet. Which is, and hard ground gets wet with even the slightest of rain. Soft ground absorbs water and then it gets wet. Then you can pray fi rihal, right? So here Imam al-Shurwali sort of gathers between several opinions wisely, right? One is that the excuse is when your face would disappear in it. Or the other is that you'd get dirty, right? Or it's just getting a little mud on your clothing, because you could just remove it. But if it causes harm or spoils it, right? So there'd be a haraj, right? Just getting your clothes slightly wet. It's raining heavily, but the ground's a little bit wet, but you pray in it. Will it cause harm to your clothes if your clothes just got just pure water? Right? Etc. Right? Right? فلا يبيح ذلك. Right? أما مجرد النداوة, as for just there being moisture, like wetness on the ground, that's not an excuse. Right? والذي لا دابة له يصلي قائما في الطين بالإيماء. As for the one who doesn't have doesn't have an animal, it's raining heavily and it's muddy on the ground, very muddy, and of course, and there's no common sense assume, and there's no dry spot. There's no dry spot. There's nothing you can put on top of it, etc., etc., etc. So they pray standing with head movements. وَجُمُوحِ الدَّابَّةِ, or the animal's gone out of control. وَعَدَمِ وُجْدَانِ مَنْ يُرْكِبُهُ, or not finding someone who can put one back on the animal. You're on a camel and you've got broken legs, so you need someone to help you ride. The guy doing the caravan operations is constipated in the washroom. You need to pray. What do? You can't jump. You can't get off yourself. And that's an excuse. يعني من يركبه دابته ولو كانت غير جموح, even if it's not out of control, because you have no control. Because المرء قادر بقدرة, you're only able with your ability, and it's your present ability that's considered. So it'd be recommended to wait till the person comes back within the time, but you wouldn't miss the prayer for this. Okay. لعجزه, because of your inability. بالاتفاق. ولا تلزمه الإعادة بزوال العذر, and it's not required to repeat the prayer once the excuse is lifted, because of what we mentioned. التكليف بقدر الوسع, responsibilities to the extent of capacity. بقدرة نفسه, by your own capacity, not with that of another, at that time, at that particular time. والمريض الذي يحصل له بالنزول والركوب زيادة مرض, and a sick person, but for whom getting down or riding would would be more sick, or بطء برء, or their healing would be delayed, يجوز له الإيماء بالفرض على الدابة. It is permitted for them to pray their fard with head movements. And this is if that khawf, if that fear of worsening situation or delayed healing is established soundly, trustworthy advice, past experience, etc. And generally it's best for people of religious concern to consult. This is my situation. Is this an excuse or not? Right? So how does one do it? يجوز له الإيماء بالفرض على الدابة واقفة مستقبل القبلة. Right? In these situations, one can pray the fard on one's mount, still when able to stop it, right? Because of the consideration of ittihad al-makan. Number two, facing the qibla. Because, okay, you can't stand, but you can still face the qibla. So inability to fulfill one condition does not allow you not to fulfill another. Right? In amkan, if possible, meaning without hardship, bila haraj. وإلا فلا, otherwise not. وكذا لطين المكان. Likewise, if the area is muddy. وإن وجد العاجز عن الركوب معينا فهي مسألة القادر بقدرة الغير. If the one unable to ride on their own found someone who can assist them, then it's the issue of the one able with the ability of another. يعني عاجز عنده. Such a person, the one who's able with another person's ability but not their own, is unable according to Abu Hanifa. لأن المرء قادر بقدرة نفسه لا بقدرة غيره, according to Abu Hanifa. خلافا لهما, contrary to the صاحبين. And the fatwa is on the position of the Imam in the madhab. And here Imam Tahtawi disagrees, right? And there's some nuance, but the mu'tamad of the madhab is the position of Abu Hanifa here. Some of the ulama made tafsil. And the rajih, those who said that the fatwa is on the position of the sahibain made some tafsil. When is it on the position of sahibain? It's not absolutely, right? You have to be careful about this, right? And that's why you can't take, opinions just from like a brief footnote. Because he's saying, we discussed it before, right? That's why fiqh is not easy business, right? That's in the case of, for example, ممن تلزمهم طاعته عادة, of those who are expected to serve you normally, without it being a hardship for them, which would be like, in some societies, the wife or, children who are in one's household, for example, or a household servant, etc. In those, or someone you hired for care, right? Right? كالمرأة إذا لم تقدر على النزول إلا بمحرم أو زوج. Like a woman who can't come down, let's say, if she can't come down without the assistance of a mahram or a husband, but they're not there, right? ومعادل زوجته ومعادل زوجته, right? Right? What's معادل زوجته?
Equal in weight.
Huh?
Her spouse and her mahram are equal.
Anyone?
My understanding was someone who was akin to her zawj.
I thought it was if her son is with her, then he should help her
Yeah.
ride.
Muadil, someone who's like معادل زوجته أو محرمه إذا لم يقم ولده محله كالمرأة. Right? 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 So someone else besides the husband or the mahram, if the child cannot fulfill that, meaning assisting, getting her down, is like a woman, being like a woman in that person's presence is not sufficient for it to be an excuse. She's not considered able by that person's ability. Right? How? A woman's on the camel. Right? Her husband went to do shopping. The woman needs to get down to pray. So if there's someone else, right, who's able, but she's not able to use him, right, would be like the woman in terms of inability. So let's say there's her friend came down because her husband took her down. But now her wife's, the wife's friend, the wife's friend's husband can't assist her, because even though he's able, he just helped his wife, but he can't be in physical contact with her. And the woman's friend who came down, she can't, why? On the assumption that she's not able to bear the weight, etc. Right? But now if she's like the hatta katta, like she's like all like bulky, right? I actually dealt with a real case. From Chicago, there's a sister who became Muslim. She used to run the drug trade in her neighborhood. She'd made millions before Islam. The husband made fun of her about something, so she lifted him up, like a wrestling technique, lifted him up and threw him onto the sofa. Poor guy broke his leg. I didn't believe it, but I had to answer the question about what can you do about prayers. So, this is if she's unable. وَصَلَاةُ فِي الْمَحْمِلِ وَهُوَ عَلَى الدَّابَّةِ كَالصَّلَاةِ عَلَيْهَا. Praying on a carriage that is on the animal is like praying on the animal. فِي الْحُكْمِ الَّذِي عَلِمْتَهُ. In the rulings that we've seen. It's allowed for the nafil outside city limits, not allowed for the fard. You have to get down. سواء كانت سائرة أو واقفة. Whether the animal and carriage are moving or still. ولو واقفا وجعل تحت المحمل خشبة أو نحوها حتى بقي قراره أي المحمل إلى الأرض. Right? بواسطة ما جعل تحته كان أي صار المحل بمنزلة الأرض فتصح الفريضة فيه قائما لا قاعدا بالركوع والسجود. Right? Now, if the carriage is on the animal, whether moving or still, you can't pray the fard on it. But if you placed under the carriage like supports such that now it is supported by the ground, it's like praying on the ground. Right? So therefore you could do the fard on it on condition that it be standing. You couldn't do it sitting down. It's not like a ship. Because the permissibility of praying standing on a ship, as we will see, is out of necessity. Right? Because if you're praying on a ship and you can get on the land, we'll look at the fiqh of that next. Of course, there's a supposition here. What's the supposition? So the rulings on a dabba, because the asl is you're praying on the ground, right? When you are praying on an animal, your prayer is ascribed to, you're considered to be on top of the animal. And the animal doesn't have the qarar on the ground, like, So, adatan, what are you not able to do on it? To pray standing with bowing and prostration, because the animal moves, etc. Now, in a car, The car generally follows these rulings, but not absolutely. Why? I have friends who in Alberta who they buy these. I was like, man, you guys make some money because they're expensive. They bought these minivans, these transporter minivans, whose roof is tall enough that they're able to pray in the trunk of the car. They do Salat al-Jama'ah in the trunk of their car. So these religious families, it was weird. Like we went to events, there had like 5, 6 of these. I said, what's the secret behind everyone having these transporter minivans? Yeah, Mercedes Transporter or whatever it's called. That's because we pray in it. Are you kidding me? I said, no, just try. I said, I'm not going to pray in it, but you could stand. Now if you can face the Qibla, stand, this, that, the other, and there's qarar al-ard there, because there's a difference between the wheels are solidly on the ground. So you can pray. When you can, it's generally better just to pray straight on the ground, but that's not like a ship, and that's not like the beast. So there's some differences between, so some modes of transport. Some buses, it's theoretically possible, right? There's some people who drive bus drivers, right? So in the Emirates once I was not able to board my flight from Abu Dhabi to Sydney, Australia. They said I had to show the credit card of the person who booked the ticket. I said the hosts there booked it. I said, okay, that's fine, but we need their credit card. I said, well, I have a scan, this and that, I have a letter of authorization, the whole. I said, no, you can't. I had to avoid that ticket. I need to get there. There's no flights because they all had this requirement. That airline had that requirement, weird requirement. The only flights available where that was not the case were from Dubai. How do I get from Abu Dhabi to Dubai? Nobody would tell me. I don't want to spend unnecessary money. I've already delayed my flight, and in the middle of a trip, it's quite annoying. So what do I do? Nobody would tell me, even from the airline. I asked a Desi guy, looked pretty sharp, was working for the company. I said, Yaar, I'm stuck. What should I do? Because Sarajevo, there's a bus that goes between the 2 terminals from the airline. Why did no one tell me? Oh, because nobody wants the extra effort. So, which is ridiculous. So this fancy bus, I've never been on a fancier bus in my life. It had I don't know how many remote controls it had. You could do everything imaginable with the seat. You could tilt the seat, backwards, sideways, 3-dimensionally. Why do you need to do that when on a bus? But ridiculous waste of time. There's all kinds of snacks. I asked permission. Can I take some snacks for the journey? I said, go ahead. I said, take as much as you want. Nobody. There's only myself and some German guy saw me got in, so he got in. 2 of us. Right? Even though all these people are taking taxis and stuff. Anyway, the bus driver asks, okay, sometimes I'm alone, etc. It's hot outside. Can I pray in the bus? What's the ruling? Can you pray with ruku' and sujood on the bus? Yeah. Can you face the Qibla? Yes. When it's stationary? Yes. So that's a different scenario, right? That's because the assumption broadly there's 3 considerations, right? What are they? Standing, facing the Qibla, and ittihad al-makan. And the 4th is, are you on the al-ard, that there's istiqrar. Now with animals, the istiqrar thing is not there, because the animal doesn't just stay still. Being on the animal, you are not on the ground, and is there istiqrar, right? So those are the underlying considerations. On that kind of, I'm not suggesting anyone go buy that kind of minivan. It's not that cold in Toronto. There are places where it's cold. People who do that, it's valid. Okay. فصل في الصلاة على السفينة. صلاة الفرض والواجب فيها وهي جارية حالة كونه قاعدا بلا عذر به وهو يقدر على الخروج منها صحيحة عند الإمام الأعظم أبي حنيفة رحمه الله تعالى، ولكن بالركوع والسجود لا بالإماء، لأن الغالب في القيام دوران الرأس والغالب كالمتحقق، لكن القيام فيها والخروج أفضل إن أمكنه لأنه أبعد عن الشبهة. يعني أبعد عن شبهة الخلاف وأسكن للقلب. Okay. Praying the fard and the wajib in in meaning on, right? On the ship while it is moving, while seated on the ground. Any meaning with bowing and prostrations, he'll tell us, even without excuse, even when able to get off the boat, meaning get onto land, is valid according to Abu Hanifa. So this is, you could diagram this. The safina could be stationary or moving. It could be tied to the shore or not. And when it's tied to the shore, is it tied such that the ship is now mustaqir, or is it as if floating freely? Right? Is it possible for you to get off without difficulty or not possible? So those are the permutations of the issue. And we'll see. So when this ship is moving, right, even if, so you know, you're on a ship, it's moving, right? Even if you could get out of the ship does not mean jump into the ocean. What does it mean? Get on land, right? It's valid according to Abu Hanifa, without dislike, but they say it's improper, and some said there's isa'a, right? If you're doing it with bowing and prostration, not with mere head movements, right? Because the general case, he said, on a ship is that your head would be moving. Like your head be dawaran al-ras, meaning that it's unstable. That, i.e. that there would be undue hardship in standing. There'd be undue hardship in standing. And al-ghalib kal-mutahaqqaq. And the general is considered as if actual. Now some took this as an absolute. Imam Abu Hanifa allowed praying on ships, on boats, right? Because they bob. So they say, okay, this would apply to small boats, but not big ones. Because big ships, even old ones, they don't bob. They're still, right? So is it muqayyad or not? There's two pathways in the madhab about this, on the ship thing. Now the safe thing is that, okay, analogous to the ship would be the issue of the plane. And of course you can't yourself get off the thing, but let's say when the plane is in the air, if there's any turbulence, then yes, were there any hardship in standing, then yes, the position of Abu Hanifa is very followable, that even if there's any dawran al-ras, then yes, you could pray sitting down. Sitting down meaning with bowing and prostration. But taking that unconditionally, if things are stable, would be contrary to basic caution. But standing, even when there's some dawran al-ras, is better, and to get onto land is superior, because it's further away from shubhat al-khilaf because of the semblance of difference of opinion, and askan lil qalb, and gives more conducive to peace of mind. وقالا, and the Sahibain said, أي أبو يوسف ومحمد رحمه الله تعالى لا تصح جالسا. Prayer is not permitted seated. جالسا meaning قاعدا. Right here, جالسا meaning what's mentioned before, which is the قاعدا, sitting on the ground with even if bowing process. إلا من عذر, except when there is an excuse. وهو الأظهر, and this is the more apparent. لحديث ابن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم سئل عن الصلاة في السفينة. Because this hadith of Ibn Umar, the Prophet ﷺ was asked about prayer on a boat. فقال صلي فيها قائما إلا أن تخاف الغرق. Pray standing in it unless you fear drowning. وقال مثله لجعفر رضي الله تعالى عنه. And the Prophet ﷺ said similarly to Ja'far, may Allah be well pleased with him, Ibn Abi Talib. And this is when he was sent to Abyssinia, because they had to cross the Red Sea. ولأن القيام ركن, because the standing is an integral. فلا يترك إلا بعذر محقق, and it's not left except for an actual condition, لا موهوم, not just an imagined condition. Now, see, there's a healthy tension sometimes between Nur al-Idah and the Maraqi. So what does he say in Nur al-Idah? That the Adhar, the more apparent, and this is al-Adhar dalilan, right? Wal-Adhar fiqhan. The Adhar in its dalil and in the fiqh of it. But then he had to backtrack, because he was challenged on this. How can you say this? So he says in the commentary, وَدَلِيلُ الْإِمَامِ أَقْوَى. And the proof of the author of both is the same. And this is someone who's faqihun nafs. That's the nature of fiqh, the author himself. And there are issues where between Nur al-Idah, the Imdad, and the Maraqi, there's a 3-step shift in the opinion, in the same author. So, it's the nature of fiqh. You got to live with it. It says, وَدَلِيلُ الْإِمَامِ أَقْوَى. The proof of the Imam is stronger. فَيُتَّبَعْ, and it should be followed. لأن ابن سيرين قال, because Ibn Sirin, of course Ibn Sirin is famous for his book of dreams now, because someone bothered translating it, whatever. Ibn Sirin was min a'yan as-salaf, right? Of the tabi'een. And it is said that he's of the people, that encourage Imam Abu Hanifa to seek knowledge, etc., etc., etc. He was a great Imam of Hadith and the Ulum, he says. So Ibn Sirin said, صلينا مع أنس رضي الله تعالى عنه في السفينة. We prayed with Sayyidina Anas in the Safina. قعودا ولو شئنا لخرجنا إلى الجد. Says, and we prayed seated in the boat, and if we wanted, we could have gone to the shore. Al-Jidd is a shati. Right? وقال مجاهد, and Mujahid, also the early Muslims, said صلينا مع جنادة رضي الله تعالى عنه في السفينة قعودا ولو شئنا لقمنا. That we prayed with Junada ibn Jundub in the boat, seated, and if we had wished, we could have stood. And there's other athar like this, indicating that there's leeway. وقال الزاهدي, this of course now much later, الزاهدي صاحب القنية وغيرها, حديث ابن عمر وجعفر محمول على الندب. The hadith of Ibn Umar and Ja'far is understood to be for encouragement. فظهر قوة دليله. So the strength of the evidence of Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion became manifest. لموافقة تابعيين, because of two great tabi'is, and these are not just any tabi'is, two of the a'yan of the tabi'in, ابن سيرين ومجاهد وصاحبيين and two وصحابيين and two great companions أنس وجنادة فيتبع قول الإمام رحمه الله تعالى. And there's that اختلاف. Now, practical caution is if you're able to stand without any hardship, the position of the Sahibain would be you have to. Imam Abu Hanifa would say, you don't, but it would be better. Right? It would be better. You can. But if there's disturbances there, you can pray sitting on the ground. He explains what is the excuse. وَالْعُذْرُ كَدَوَرَانِ الرَّأْسِ. And there are those who said it's the same. And that's a nice tatbiq, but it's not. And some of the mutaakhirin try to do that. Say no. There's no difference between their opinion that he said it, when there is, that the udhr is considered as if actual. What if there isn't a udhr? Then the position of the Sahibain applies. So try to do that. It's hard to argue. There would appear to be a substantial ikhtilaf, and you can see it in the works of the khilaf between Abu Hanifa and the Sahibain. This arises as being a substantial khilaf. And their requisite reasoning is found there. Allahu A'lam. Wal-udhr, and the excuse is كَدَوَارَانِ الرَّأْسِ, where your head would move, meaning you'd be unstable. Yes, such that بحيث يخاف السقوط, such that you'd be worried about falling over. وعدم القدرة على الخروج, or being unable to leave the boat, meaning onto the shore. ولا يجوز أي لا يصح الصلاة فيها بالإماء. It is not permitted, i.e. not valid, to pray on the ship with mere head movements, meaning unless you have to follow the tartib for the fard. If you can stand, you must, according to Sahibain. If not, you must pray on the ground with head movements. If you cannot pray standing nor sitting on the ground, then you can pray with head movements. Right? لمن يقدر على الركوع والسجود, for anyone able to perform ruku' and sujood. اتفاقا, by agreement. The ikhtilaf is, do you have to stand or not between the Imam and the Sahibain? لفقد المبيح حقيقة وحكما, because of the permitting excuse is not found for the bowing and prostration actually or effectively. Now, what about the one that's tied to the, what about a ship that is tied? This is the next issue, right? And if it's tied, there's a case when it's bobbing, right? And there's the one that's tied and it's, so let's see. والمربوطة في لجة البحر بالمراسي والحبال ومع ذلك تحركها الريح تحريكا شديدا كالسائرة. هي كالسائرة. If it's tied in the sea, but despite, with ropes and the like, and yet is moved by the winds intensely, it's like one that is moving. في حكم الذي علمته, in the rulings that you've seen. والخلاف فيه, والخلاف فيه, and the difference of opinion that we have seen. وإلا, and otherwise, أي وإن لم تحركها شديدا, if it does not move, it's not shaking, so there's no instability. فكالواقفة, then it would be like one that is still. Bishat, right? So one is, it's still in the ocean, right? It's tied, or there's an anchor, right? But if it's bobbing around, then it's like it's moving, same ruling. But if it's still, then it's like the one that is tied to the shat, tied to the shore, right? Like at a harbor or just لا تجوز الصلاة فيها قاعدا. It's not permitted to sit there, to pray there sitting down. Why? Because the excuse of standing that allowed to leave standing, which is dawran al-ra's, that the instability is not there because it's still. So then you must pray standing. مع قدرتها على القيام, if able to pray standing. لانتفاء المقتضى أو المقتضي للصحة, because the thing that would permit validly sitting has been negated, which is either actual or effective instability. بالإجماع, with consensus, meaning of our three imams. على الصحيح, according to the sound opinion. واحتراز عن قول بعضهم إن أنها أيضا على الخلاف, because, and this is against what some have said in the Hanafi madhab about there being اختلاف on this issue. فإن صلى في المربوطة بالشط قائما وكان شيء من السفينة على قرار الأرض صحت الصلاة بمنزلة الصلاة على السرير, وإلا أي ولا إن لم تستقر على شيء يعني منها, وإن لم يستقر منها شيء على الأرض فلا تصح الصلاة فيها على المختار كما في المحيط والبدائع لأنها حينئذ كالدابة. Okay, now if it's tied to the shore, then, right? So we have the moving one, then you have a middle case, which is one that's tied in the water, whether it's the ocean or the big river, in the middle of the river. Yeah, sometimes the river can be miles wide, right? That's sometimes they call a wide river can be called a bahar as well, right? Classical Arabic. So it's tied in the body of water. The third case is tied to the shore. When it's tied to the shore, then if one prays in it, if it's tied to the shore standing, and anything of the boat itself is connected with the ground, right? Connected with resting on the ground, whether the ground of the shore or of the ground of the shore of the land, or of the bottom of the water, right? Because so it's on the ground, whether the ground that's the land or the ground under the water, then you're praying to something connected to the ground. So then it's like praying on the carriage that is standing on the ground, right? And if it's not, if it's tied to the side, if it's tied to the land, but none of the ship is on ground, then it is like praying on an animal, that if you can pray on the land, you must, right? Then praying in it is not valid according to the chosen opinion, as mentioned in the muhit and the bada'i', because then it is like considered like the animal. And then he says وظاهر الهداية والنهاية جواز الصلاة في المربوطة بالشط قائما مطلقا. And so Imam al-Shurunbulali is being cautious about this. He got criticized significantly about this position. But Imam Shurunbulali frequently, and this is blessed, inclines on many things where caution is feasible towards caution. Like his inclination was to choose the opinion of the Sahibain about having to stand out of practical caution. Right? That's blessed. Then here he says no, if it's tied to if it's not on the ground, the boat's not on the ground, then you can't pray on it, because it's tied to the ground, then you're able to pray on the ground, then you have to get off. And said this is what's mentioned in the Muhit and the Bada'i', but then he has to admit, وَظَاهِرُ الْهِدَايَةِ وَالنِّهَايَةِ. And the Nihaya, this is of Husamuddin al-Sighnaqi. النهاية في شرح الهداية is the earliest of the commentaries on the Hidayah and one of the greatest. Frequently neglected because it's huge. Huge. Yeah, huge-ish, but big enough. It's big. So a lot of, and it's sometimes a bit extensive. So many people, but the things that come after, as you see, the great ulama would, despite Fath al-Qadir and the Inaya and the Binaya, they still keep going back to it. It's more recent challenges that anyways. So ظاهر الهداية والنهاية جواز الصلاة في المربوطة. These two works, their apparent expression is that if it's tied to the ship is tied to the land, it is permitted to pray on it unconditionally. أي سواء استقرت أو لا, whether it is resting on ground or not. إلا إذا لم يمكنه الخروج, unless you cannot go out, then you're stuck, then you can pray on it. فلا ضرر فيصلي فيها للحرج, then you can pray on it out of need. Okay. And then he says, وإذا كانت سائرة يتوجه المصلي فيها للقبلة لقدرته على فرض الاستقبال عند افتتاح الصلاة وكلما استدارت. And if the boat is traveling or it is tied on in the water, in the middle of the water, but yet moving, or if it's tied to the side and you're not able to get down, or etc. In each of these situations, you face the Qibla. You must face the Qibla at the beginning of the prayer. And every time the boat turns, in the cases where it turns, right? Whether it is the case of it traveling, or in the case where it's tied, but it's bobbing around. Right? If it's bobbing around that much, then every time it moves, you must continue facing the Qibla. يتوجه المصلي باستدارتها إليها إلى القبلة في خلال الصلاة, even during the prayer. وإن عجز يمسك عن الصلاة حتى يقدر إلى أن يتمها مستقبلا. And if you're not able, right? One doesn't pray. Meaning if it's so turbulent that you're not able to face the Qibla, you wait till it settles down. Right? Until one is able to complete the prayer facing the Qibla. وَلَوْ تَرَكَ الْإِسْتِقْبَالَ لَا تُجْزِئُهُ فِي قَوْلِهِمْ جَمِيعًا. But if you just leave facing the Qibla, it is not valid according to any of their positions. Now there's significant khilaf. We're going to stop here and take Taraweeh next, and bring your other volume too, just in case. Last thing about this, there's significant ikhtilaf about some of the juz'iyat here. Tahtawi disagrees. So Imam al-Shurunbulali has pieced together the prayer on the Safina in a particular manner. We'll recap a few of the issues. I just wanted to finish the section first and to understand what Imam Shurunbulali has to say. He was critiqued on a few of these points. We'll take them. His piecing of it, but Imam Shurunbulali's piecing of it is based not only on the theoretical, what is theoretically more correct, fiqh-wise. Imam Shurunbulali also looks at practical caution very often. Right? That's one of his frequent considerations. Right? Like we saw the issue of saying that the adhanul muhdith, he said it's makruh. Right? He inclines towards caution on many things where caution is praiseworthy. And sometimes they're his choices, sometimes they are supported by others. And that's good. And he points to this reality in Imdad al-Fattah in the beginning. And we've mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate, what does he say? That he chooses what is sound. And he mentions in the Imdad, even if it is not what the ulama, what others may have said to be the asah. Due to considerations. But not bitashahi. Not just whimsically, that I just want to choose this one. And that's why he was praised. Right? And sometimes there are opinions that are weak, yes. But we cannot just do a blanket dismissal of these choices of Imam Shurubulali rahimahullah, because he's choosing these due to legal consideration. Like here, what is a legal consideration? The validity of people's prayer. And where there's khilaf. Like it's tied by the land. It's bobbing, it's not ground, and you're right by the ground. Do you have any kind of inability? No. Because the one that's on the water, then you can at least say, technically you can't jump into the land, right? So you're at least at that moment unable to pray on the ground. Because normally a ship requires a certain amount of depth to be in the water, right? So there's effective inability to pray on land, even if you could get to the land. Right? So, okay. But when you're by the land and you can get off, that's why Imam Shurubulali's opinion, I would suggest first, and that's why I wanted to break it in two parts, first diagram what Imam Shurubulali says here. Let's do that. And then we'll take the next layer of where the khilaf revolves around this issue. But let's understand Imam Shurubulali, and his presentation of this has practical caution. Number of people wrote treatises on this, amongst them Sayyid Ahmad al-Hamwi on As-Salat al-Safina. And even after Imam Shurubulali, there's a lot of back and forth about the considerations on this, because what we have from the Imams of the Madhab on this is a certain amount of detail. There's a lot of takhrij on their opinions, so there's a healthy range of difference about the possibilities, especially about al-marbuta fi al-bahr and al-waqifa fi al-bahr and al-marbuta bil-shati. These things. So if you first conceptually diagram, moving, stopped in the water, like anchored, let's just say, and tied to the land. And then you break it down that way, the core of the issues, then we can see where the khilaf is. But first let's diagram what Imam Shurubulali himself has to say, and then we'll look at some of these. So there is the ikhtilaf in the furu', and then how does this apply to a plane? Right? We'll take that. So we'll spend about half an hour recapping that, and just going to the khulasa of what the ulama mentioned about cars, trains, planes, and then we'll start Taraweeh bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.